look at this free shirt that I got.
Lovely. Last night I was invited to a UScreen event, basically an event for creators discussing different ways in which they produce their content and make a living off it. And there are a lot of very interesting insights. I mean, I made, like, look at this. Look at this on my phone. All of this is notes from the evening just going down. Like, it just keeps going, it doesn't stop. So I figured I may as well have a little chat and impart the knowledge which I learned throughout the very long afternoon and evening with very, very fascinating, amazing people. The first people I managed to chat to in the evening, just completely coincidentally, was a co-founder and marketing director of Licked. And Licked is a website that allows you to license like mainstream music. So if you want to use a Justin Bieber track or a Sabrina Carpenter song in one of your videos, go onto there. They'll have a different price point depending on how many views you get, and you can use it completely fine in your videos. It means when David Dobrik was losing probably tens of millions of dollars a year by using mainstream music in his videos, he could have made that tens of millions of dollars back just by spending maybe like 100, 200 grand a year in music licensing. He's just an idiot. I don't know why he did that. But it was interesting talking to them because they were saying that when people use mainstream music in their videos, it can actually lift viewership in the video by like 14 or 20. I can't remember what the number was, like 14 or 24% or something big. But he was also saying, in contrast, if you choose a bad song, it could also decrease the video. So you got to be careful which music you choose. But then I kind of added on that you're buying into a pre-existing nostalgia that is established. So if you were choosing a song that people already have a connection to, then you were just bringing that connection into the story that you're trying to tell. So it is a very smart business model that I was trying to figure out when I was in like year 6, because music licensing was impossible unless you were like a mainstream sort of label or whatever in a studio. Where now it's as easy as going onto a website doing it, or if you don't want mainstream music, you want just a bit cheaper, like broad sound effects, whatever, there's a million sites that offer that for you. So that was very fascinating talking to these guys. And even them, like, I was like, okay, is this kind of something that got easy with TikTok, right? That you were able to get these labels to give up their control, because as everyone knows, like especially companies like Universal or whatever, they love to hold on to the rights to their music and exploit everyone. And he was like, no. And because he actually started the company before TikTok even existed, when it was still like in its Musical.ly era. Sure, TikTok came along, they stole the music, then they negotiated rights, and they started relinquishing a bit of control that they had. But this guy went to these just beefy record labels and said, hey, I have a way that can make you money you're not currently earning. Because there's all these people that are using your tracks, you're making no money off. So what happens if you just give people the ability to use that music, embrace that music for, they might be fans of those artists or whatever, and you can make money off the back end that you weren't making otherwise. And it's like, of course they're going to say yes. So apparently went through their data, whatever, helped them out and just proved that this was a no-brainer for them. So started the company 8 years ago and it's done really well. I mean, there's a ton of your favorite creators will absolutely be using that service. And this isn't that. It's just like a very interesting part of the industry that I have always sort of paid attention to. Sometimes I feel like I could have been a lawyer. Not because I'd probably be able to sit down for that long and just read paper after paper after paper, but because I'm always fascinated by rules and how do you navigate these rules in the best way possible. And then the marketing director as well made a good point that because there is such an attitude of like, how do you get access to this music, right? You're using this A-list song that just came out last month. It's like the most poppin' thing of, summer. That acts as a marketing mechanism because audience members like, how did you do it? And then they can be like, I use this service, go down in the description and you can also get access to it. So it becomes a cycle in itself. You already got the audience asking the question of how do I get access to this? You're not having to convince them to do that. They're already there wondering themselves. Also, what I keep noticing throughout every single creator event I go to is newsletters. Everyone has a newsletter and everyone says they wish they had a newsletter earlier. I'm not necessarily going to start one now because it's like another thing that you got to add on. So that's always part of it. If you've got to add another thing, like you got to be careful how many platforms you navigate to, because you're doing Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, Threads. Like there's a million different platforms you can engage on. So you kind of got to choose wisely. But pretty much everyone has a newsletter because you then control the audience. Because you have the emails that you can send to. You're not susceptible to algorithms, whether it shares it out with people. You know exactly who it's going to. You know the customer demographic. You can reach out to them if you want and even say, hey, I'm doing some like customer feedback. Can we hop on a call so I can make sure that the product is as good as possible? And of course people are going to say this, yes. They're like, so I get to talk to the person that I like to help make the product that I use better. It's a no-brainer, but you can't do that in an algorithmic-centric environment. So that's why everyone seems to love newsletters at the moment, because you have complete control over the messaging. and the audience that you don't really get elsewhere. And then when you finally do try and pivot people to paywalled content, let's say from the newsletter to the paywalled content or from YouTube to the paywalled content, you can't be decreasing your public output. You have to keep putting stuff out on YouTube and those public platforms, not decrease that to like just basically what people were already getting, move that behind a paywall, because then people get mad. And we've seen that with a bunch of creators trying to launch like those paywall structures, and the audience has gone crazy because they're like, what we were getting free, now we have to pay for. So it's making sure you still have that consistent output. And now you just say there's additional stuff, additional depth, additional structure that you can get behind this wall that you won't be able to get publicly because I need to be able to fund putting this together in the first place. And generally people are very receptive to that because they're like, yep, fair enough. It provides me a lot of value. I'm willing to go and do that. But it's also not directly selling it, because if I shove something in your face saying, hey, do this, you're like, no, go away, this is annoying, I'm going to leave now. But if you say, if you like this, there's more over here, then the people who don't care about over here, they'll just keep going watching the free stuff, maybe move on to something else, but they're not going to get annoyed. With the people who are desperate to get more, they'll shift over there with that positive association because you haven't pissed them off, and they're like, lovely, this is amazing, it's worth the money, I'm going to spend it on this product or service, and hence the ability to grow is much greater. And then within that, to build extra depth and extra connection, once you have that behind the scenes community, they kept reiterating the benefit of challenges. And it means it depends on what sort of industry you're in. But if you can host challenges within your community, and I've had that with communities that I've joined from different creators, that it gets people involved, because then they start communicating with each other, start helping each other out. Someone says, this is what I did, and someone's like, hey, this is ways you can improve, this is what you're doing really well. And it just improves the overall circle as a whole, which, you know, is much harder to do if you're trying to do it manually through every single Instagram DM, every single comment. You kind of create a cycle in itself, get people excited, get people involved, and you increase the audience retention there and customer life cycle. And also the fact that you should be prioritizing the existing community rather than trying to get new ones. You always want new people there because obviously you're increasing audience, you're potentially increasing revenue, which means you can increase more stuff that you put out and more people that you impact. But it is more important to make sure you maximize the current audience that you have, make sure they're getting as much value as possible, because they're the ones that will probably stay around the longest. They're the ones that will be those 100 true fans that tell all of their friends and family about who you are, what you do, what value you can provide for them and their network of people. So if you make sure that you focus completely and utterly on building as much depth as possible, that gives you a lot more longevity than just purely, once again, trying to get as many views as possible. Because you can get as many views as possible, but then you have those stories of those TikTokers with like 25 million followers that host a meet and greet and literally no one shows up. And then you have people with like only 10,000 followers that host a little meetup and the whole park is full, purely because they're focused much more on making sure that the people who watch really care and really get value, rather than trying to reach as many people as possible who just generally don't give a shit at all whatsoever. And you often hear, which is very true, is that community mostly is word of mouth. Yes, you can send something online, and I know Instagram now, the CEO has said that one of their biggest metrics for success of a video is how many times does it get shared with people and messages. And there is value in that, obviously. But still the biggest value is sitting side by side, maybe two homies chilling, having some dinner, you chuck something on the TV, and that's how you share an experience. So there's common experiences that side to side, hey, have you seen this? You should look at this. That really, if you can cultivate, will bring you far more value than anything else. Because that's, if you're building a bond and the connection between two individuals, that's a lot harder to dismantle and will fade a lot slower than something that just maybe one person enjoys themselves. But in line with that, the thing that can really help people stay is creating a sort of transformational experience, right? It's really affecting the humanity, the human experience, that if you're kind of like an instant moment, you're like, oh, that was funny, people kind of move on and they don't care. But if you can impact someone in an important moment in their life, maybe they're sad and you make them laugh. Maybe they are confused and lost and don't know how to solve a problem, and you're an education provider and you teach them something and they learn and they're able to pass their exam. That holds with people. It's the reason things like Casey Neistat did so well, like David Dobrik did so well, making people laugh. Like that, the Vlog brothers, like Hank Green and John Green, helping people go through the education systems. Because if you can do that, they will always be indebted to you. Indebted may not be the right word, but there'll always be that connection to the first ones, the people who helped you through those hardest times. So if you can do that, once again, you increase that audience life cycle far more than you would just posting a little dance on TikTok, as you know, a lot of people somewhat successfully do, but then they drop off very quickly after. Something that one of the creators was saying that I definitely don't know enough is trying to understand what problem are you solving and don't get distracted by anything else that arises. It's making sure that you're putting your energy into the most effective areas, right? Like if you're doing YouTube really well, if you're doing Instagram really well, don't open up a Twitter. Don't open up a Facebook if that is going to divert your time and compromise on the other stuff. If you're already getting lead generation, if you're already seeing audience growth from two things that you're doing well, why open up another avenue that does not have those same conversion rates and that same value delivery? Just keep focusing on what is doing well until I guess you're at a point where you can start outsourcing stuff and maybe experimenting a bit. But if you don't have those means, just keep working on what works and focusing on that customer journey, making sure that they can go through. Like if you're talking about a pure marketing approach, you got top of funnel leading to what you're trying to sell them. So top of funnel, maybe, hey, I've got a YouTube channel. Then you got a middle funnel, which is, if you want a bit more, here's a free newsletter. Then you got the bottom of the funnel, which is, here's a product that you can buy. So you need to make sure that this flows well, that it's as smooth as possible, that people don't get confused about, what are you actually offering here? I don't know, there's a couple of different things, I'm kind of confused, I don't really get it, I'm just going to go now. And you also want to make sure that the flow works, that, it's some shit as simple as like links work on a website, and then it's as easy as possible to navigate the process. Because there's nothing more annoying that you start going through something, it doesn't work, and you're like, I give up, I'm just moving on. But if everything flows smoothly, it makes the experience better for you, because you get more conversion rates for whatever it is that you're trying to sell or push, and it makes it better for the customer because they've had a better experience overall, and they're not really annoyed at just trying to get used to the service as a whole, or just get access to whatever it is that you're providing. I was talking for a while with a really fascinating guy. I won't say his name because he kind of wants to stay a bit, not anonymous, but I respect it. We had a good chat about that. The fact that he's happy to talk about and advertise how much value he's created within people, the amount of people that he's helped through his education. But he doesn't want to advertise by how much money he's made, how many subscribers does he have to his platform, because that feels a bit narcissistic. It feels a bit Americanized of like, look how amazing I am, look how big my business is. It's like, who cares? It's like, have I delivered value to my community and the people around me? And that's what matters. And then as well, it creates that attitude of, if people coming in and he's advertising how much money he's making, people then feel ripped off. It's like if you've got a tradie coming to your house and they're driving like a $200,000 Porsche, you're like, okay, you're going to rip me off here. Where if they're in a janky ute, they're like, oh, we're probably getting a good deal. But one interesting thing he had mentioned, because UScreen is basically a product that, it's tough to describe, but it's a mix between like a Patreon and Netflix. So if Patreon had a pure video focus, that you could just basically create a library of content like Netflix is, with like community management features. So he made a good point that rather than trying to create 10 courses on this piece of education, why not just have one membership platform where people can keep coming back? You got that recurring revenue, but then you can just upload everything too, because you're not having to upsell 10 courses. You just basically have one thing that you are consistently selling and pushing people to and providing value for. And they can have this massive library, and the longer you go, the more value they can get from that library. So rather than having 10 products, just keeping it one makes everything way more simple. And I was so amazed by the funnel that he created, because it was literally, as I mentioned, YouTube, newsletter, products, membership. That's it. Here's no other platforms, nothing, just that. Like, I admire how simple that is. Because if you look at what I'm doing right now, it's like, well, I've got to worry about making money. So you're talking about doing freelance, you're talking about doing a full-time job, part-time job, do I get a service job, do I actually work in industry, do I just try and focus on this stuff and hope this, starts wielding enough revenue to survive London, which is unlikely because London's way overpriced because of the housing crisis. But the point being, keeping things simple makes it easy for you and for the customer or the audience. And if you can manage that, the results can be far greater than the mess that I've created for myself, and I'm slowly weeding out, which is getting there. It just makes it easier for everyone. And we also had an interesting discussion about pricing. In that, if something's cheap, right? If you price something, let's say at $5, well, what's a good example? Let's say you're trying to sell a pair of headphones. If you sell a pair of headphones for $5, people are like, wow, that's cheap. Either they're like, wow, that's cheap, I'm going to buy it right now, or they're like, that's too cheap, something must be off, that's suspicious, I'm not going to buy it at all. It's the same reason budget airlines, they say what you are not getting. Because if they say what you're not getting, or vice versa, what you could be getting if you paid more, then you're like, I understand why it's cheap now. Because if you see like a big airline like Qantas saying we're selling a seat for $200, and then you see a budget airline saying we're selling the same seat for $70, you're like, what's going wrong here? Have they compromised on safety just to make that price down? And if they're like, no, you just don't get to choose your seat. You don't get priority boarding, you don't get extra bags or whatever. Even if the pricing is based on something else, it makes people feel like it's justified. So you can have the fact that it's cheaper and people not think, oh no, it's a bad quality product. They can understand and be fine with the compromises that they're giving up for the cheaper thing. And then it's like, okay, maybe you don't sell the headphone for $5 because people think it's too cheap. So you sell it for $50, and they're like, cool, this is a good set of headphones. But then you also have, could you sell the headphones for $90? Because you may lose, let's say you lose 10% of customers by moving it from $50 to $90, but you've just made, what, like 40% more, no, 80% more money or whatever? And it's like, well, that seems like a great deal. If you're making 80, 90% more money for only 10% reduction in customers, that's lovely. But then you also have an element where sometimes increasing the price can get you more customers because you reach a demographic that doesn't care about the price. You don't buy a Rolex or a Porsche because of the price. You don't look at the price. You buy it because of the brand that has been established. And if they decrease their price to try and get more customers, they might actually lose customers because the brand is compromised. So sometimes actually increasing can get you more customers because you get into a range where people are like, I'm buying because it must be amazing. And I've had that with producing my magazine, that if you have something like Colin Smear's Publish Press, right, selling for a certain price point, they price it way higher than they could get away with, if they're a Vogue or a Rolling Stone or whatever, because they have a brand value that an audience is willing to purchase that. But with my magazine, if I'm trying to say, I'm not a newspaper, it's a great newspaper, but I'm not a newspaper, I'm a premium photographic photo book magazine, well, I need to price it at a certain point where it's perceived as that. Because if I make it cheap, it's like, well, it must be a bad magazine. But if you price it high, it's like, wow, it must be premium. It gives that essence there. And then you have interesting buying psychology about, do you price something at like $9.99 or do you price it at $10? Because if it's priced at $10 versus $9.99, you lose a huge amount of customers because there is just that psychology there. $9.99, even though it's the same price, is way cheaper than something that's $10. But if you're trying to do something premium, a flat number can actually be perceived as, once again, much more premium. If you sell something for $100, wow, it must be really good because it's flat number, it's clean, it's amazing. Where if it's $9.99, you're trying to give me a deal, you're trying to cut on it, and it goes back to that same thing of budget airlines again. So there are also so many elements there that just makes this whole process confusing, and you're just going to experiment with to see what works best. And once again, I may be speaking too fast and I should probably slow down. So here's to that. And back onto the chain of the pre-existing customers and audience base, that previous education provider, he makes sure that his first customers pay no more than when they first started. That if they first came in at $10, they're still paying $10. And that even though the price point now may be $25, he does not increase that for the original customers, because if they're still there after all these years, they are your core audience that you want to keep around, who's probably telling, once again, all their friends and family about you. So you want to grandfather their price in a lot of the time, because that's that core base that will always hang with you. Where new customers, you can experiment with raising that price point and seeing whether it actually reduces the amount of people who show up. You also often see with a lot of subscription services, right? They'll say, this is the price for monthly. Let's say it's $10 a month. So that would come out to like $120 a year. But then they say, oh, but you can pay just $100, 20% discount if you give 2 months, right? And it's not a 20% discount, but it's 16.6 or whatever percent, something like that. And that then incentivizes people to have the big amounts up front rather than all these small installments. So if they would have usually dropped out after 5 months, well, now you've just guaranteed 10 months of, or 10 and a bit months of income if they would have, usually dropped out earlier. And now they feel good because they've gotten a bit of a discount as well. And it especially works. I remember Nebula, which is a streaming service targeted towards creators. And they reiterated constantly within their video talking about the service, the need for those long-term buy-ins, because if you can get that money up front, you're having to pay affiliate providers. This doesn't apply to the education guy, just to Nebula. But if someone brings in a customer, so you have to pay them an affiliate, that affiliate may cost you, let's say, 2 months worth of subscription revenue. But if you've got to wait 2 months worth of them to be around to pay that back before you even start, paying your own costs, then you risk having to spend a huge amount of money up front that you're hoping to get in the back end. But if you can get people to purchase the 12 months, all of a sudden you can pay the affiliate person, you can pay your costs, and now you're in profit straight away. So framing things in certain ways can just make your process a whole lot easier, make the customer feel better, and make whatever it is you're producing much more stable. And one of the things one of the staff members from UScreen was saying, which is so true, is that most people actually underprice themselves because they undervalue the value that they are delivering. And I noticed that coming to London because I was still quoting like freelance clients based on Sydney rates, and they are not the same. And the best way to get an idea of how much it changes, like you kind of have the Big Mac index, which is a rough indication of what is the spending power of people around the world. Because let's say McDonald's is a massive corporation that has a huge incentive and huge algorithms to figure out how much are people willing to pay for a burger. So depending on what price point that burger is and relative to incomes or whatever, gives you a good indication of the financial levels of each country. And you can kind of see that within the freelance industry by looking at the scalpers, by looking at the scabs. Who are the people in the industry that are charging below livable rates, right? The ones who completely and utterly undermine you because they probably live at home and have absolutely no costs going for them. And you can tell in London, those people charge about double what they would in Sydney. The scalper in Sydney for an event, photography event, may charge $150. In London, they're charging $300. And that is like the bottom of the barrel. You're getting shit, basically. And if they're doubling, well, I also have to increase my rates accordingly, once again, because costs in London are so much higher, and I'm also moving to a point where I was paying zero rent at living at home, now having to pay for rent and costs living in London myself, so you have to increase those prices. And for a client I had, I kind of felt bad, but I doubled my rate. I didn't quite double rates. I increased it by like 60%. I halved my deliverables, and once again, not quite half, maybe like decreased by 30-40%, and they still said yes. And I could tell that price point wasn't ideal for them, but also I couldn't live off the previous price point that I was pitching, and I had to increase those rates. And I applied those rates to other customers that I was working with in London, and they said yes without argument. So you kind of have to adjust sometimes on market and what people are willing to spend and understanding where you are, because someone in the north of England isn't going to be able to spend as much as someone in London, because we're just in two completely different environments. Same thing in Sydney, someone's not going to be able to spend as much as someone in New York, because there are completely and utterly different expectations on what things cost and how much people earn relative to that. And we had some really interesting discussions about the ideas of niching down. Because once again, the education guy, extremely niched, showed videos of him teaching his thing, send people to the newsletter, send people to the product of him teaching his thing, but more. But sometimes there's benefit in having a bit of breadth. Because if you're trying to build not like an education product or whatever, a product or service, if you're trying to build a personality, that requires depth. If you're just a person who talks about one thing and only that thing in the same exact format, that gets boring. But if you say, I don't know, maybe you're a public speaking coach, and you add in the fact that here's a cool event I went to, here's my puppy, here's like this and that, it makes you a lot more interesting and a lot more relatable and something for your audience to actually connect to, your audience and colleagues, that you're a real human being, not just this corporate business entity with no depth, no personality, no humanity. So having a bit of variety can help, but also not too much. Because if you look at someone like Peter McKinnon, who came up probably in 16, 17 era, and absolutely dominated the photography genre. Sort of in his modern era, you can see, well, he doesn't just teach about photography, he also does like pocket knives and quad bikes and trucks and lifestyle, like there's a whole range of stuff there. When he started, it was like just photography and videography tips. So then do you kind of have to start in a niche and then you have the option to expand, or do you kind of have a bit of variability, but then it kind of makes it hard for an audience to understand who you are and what value you're providing? So I think it's a tough balance there. And we didn't quite come to a conclusion of how much depth and personality do you have and how much do you make sure it is a very clear process for the audience to see who are you, what do you do here? Because if you don't have that, they're just going to be confused and leave. But if you do have too much of that, then they're going to get bored and also leave. So you need a bit of depth, a bit of personality, a bit of width, but still making it very clear on exactly who you are, what you do, what journey are you on. How's that been on the whole time? That noise is going to be annoying in the audio for this. Righto, well, that's the way the wind blows. There's an interesting note about, I noticed when I first started speaking, you would have a lot of like mouth sounds while you speak. And I noticed that with sometimes clients that I film as well. So I was trying to learn how to speak in a certain way that you don't have like the, and having the right amount of water and liquid in your mouth, that also you avoid that problem, because that can get really annoying if you don't keep it in check. But that's a very niche bit of knowledge you didn't expect to learn today, so you're welcome. There was also an interesting note about, rather than taking singular brand deals for certain products, this, let's say the Publish Press sponsors me and they pay me $100 to do one placement and one ad read. Cool, that's just a singular thing. The audience doesn't really see it again. They don't really care. It's kind of broken the trust because I've basically broken that fourth wall. It's like, it's getting away of the value of the content. But instead, if the published press were just to pay me a retainer to be their go-to recommended product, that I would wear it in videos, that when I would talk about newspapers or publishing, that I would say that they are the go-to that everyone should go to, then that doesn't compromise the value of the a video in the first place. That instead, it is just feels more organic with the content. It is just my go-to thing, like maybe a race car driver would drive a certain brand or wear a certain brand of watch or wear a certain brand of suit. It is not compromising on the value you're trying to deliver to your audience. It just becomes a part of it in itself. And when people want to be like you because they admire whatever professional service that you're providing or inspiring them to partake in, they will follow you. It's the same sort of reason that, skateboard companies and tennis companies, they would give discounts on their products to people who are good in the community, rather than just paying like Tony Hawk or just paying Rafa to be a brand ambassador. You also pay, we don't pay, but you give discounts to the up-and-comers, the people, the older siblings, the ones that the locals admire. And I have friends, they'd be getting like 20, 30, 50, 70% off, like rackets, because of this. Because they're an up-and-comer, I guess the idea is hopefully that they stay with your brand if they do go professional, but then anyone under them will be like, that's the guy I admire in my local tennis championship tournament thing, so I want to be like him, and I'll say use the same racket as him. So there is huge value there in just having people be a long-term ambassador rather than just single ad reads. There's still value in the single ad reads. It keeps it simple. It's like a finite contract. But there is also huge value in just being a long-term ambassador for that service. That then, as things go on, you can renegotiate as you start delivering more value, more audience, etc. A huge thing as well for people who are selling a product or service, not just like building an audience, is constantly reiterating social proof. So it's about, maybe reposting DMs that you get to show that people have enjoyed your service. It's about having things on your website that validate what you are doing. Because I'm editing together a video at the moment, an interview with a magician friend. And for him, that is extremely important, because if people are just trying to quick scan your website, a magic trick isn't something that can just be shown. With my photography, they can get a very quick outline of, can I deliver? Are my photos good? But if your whole thing's a performance, then they've got to sit down for 4 minutes and see if they actually enjoy it, and that's too much. But if you can just have a couple of photos that really highlight and validate who you are, your legitimacy, and a couple of testimonials from notable people saying, this guy's good, you can trust him when you hire him, that goes a long way. It's like when you read reviews before you buy a book or go to see a movie. The exact same principle. If other people like it, you will probably like it too. Like, I literally never heard of UScreen before, the people that had hosted the event before, 2 weeks ago, when a great Austrian friend and colleague of mine recommended that I should go. And last night, or 2 nights ago, I figured that I should probably sit down and figure who these guys are before I show up to their event, at least know what their product or service is. So I'm quickly Googling them, like, who are these guys? What do they do? And I was going through some of their customers, like the people who use their service. And I'd realized that one of the people that use their service is a magic company that I had actually paid for and used like years ago when I was a kid, still pursuing that endeavor. So it's like subconsciously, not subconsciously, but unknowingly, I had already been an indirect customer of theirs like a decade before I showed up today, which I thought was a very kind of serendipitous that things are circling back around. And when I brought up that particular company, they knew exactly who it was and all the details behind that, which was very, very cool. It was a lovely event to show up to. And the free food, once again, is always amazing. It was lunch, dinner last night, and will be lunch again today. I'm not paying for the bagels out here in Camden. I'm getting them for free from events. Gotta save money somehow. Going back to the note about niching down in a way, having certain things can make you interesting, not about the humanity aspect or whatever, but it creates a sense of curiosity. I was talking to one of other people there, and he was saying that he works for that company, sure, but then he does a bit of DJing, and then he also does a bit of selling coffee. So when people who saw him DJ the other night start seeing him sell coffee, they're like, hold on a second, what's going on here? I thought you were DJing. And he's like, yeah, but I also sell coffee. And then that makes you interesting. If you kind of have two things together that aren't usually together, that stands out, rather than, you're just one of 1,000 DJs, you're the one DJ who also sells coffee. I thought that was a very interesting note there to keep in mind of and highlight that what are your seemingly random things that can pair up together that make you stand out. And then once you do stand out, how do you get into the... This is exactly why I need the water. And once you do get into start standing out, how do you get into the important circles that you need to be a part of? When a politician before an election wants to get their message out there, they will hit certain podcasts to try and, spread their message, spread their policies, whatever that may be. When a movie comes out, celebrities will start doing rounds of like junkets and interview shows. They'll do hot ones. They'll do a million other variations. The late night shows, once again, to spread the message of their product. So if you can get into those circles, that provides significant benefit. And that's what I'm slowly in the process of doing now. How can you get into those networks, get into those circles? Because once you are in there, it's just a cycle of success. Because you're constantly exposed to the environments, the events, the people, the decision makers that can really progress things forward. And I know people can sometimes talk about that in the business environment, that often big corporations or governments, they have a list of contractors. They might have like 5 contractors that they go to for new projects that they're doing. So if you can get on that list of 5 contractors, you're not necessarily guaranteed to get the project, but you actually can see that the project is there in the first place. So it can be really hard to get on that list, but once you are there, it's game over. You've won. Give or take, once again, assuming that you can actually win the pitch against the other companies. So if you can get into the networks of the circles, those podcast cycles, those interview cycles, those press cycles, your work's done for you. You're no longer having to constantly search out and reach for these people because they're the ones asking you whether they can be on your own show. And that makes things so much easier and your content so much better for less work. And also, if you can get to a certain point that if you ask, can someone be, can you be on my podcast? Or a Vogue magazine, can you be on a cover shoot? That people will fly across the world to be a part of that. If you achieve that, that is ultimate success because you've built a brand where people are willing to drop everything to be part of it because they agree and they align with the messaging or the value it is delivering so much that they just want to be part of it at all costs. And that is always the goal for every brand, or at least the brands that I'm currently working on and working with. And there are so many different ways that you can approach this industry, so many things that you can try and sell and expertise or build a community around of people who are just gaining value from whatever it is you're putting out into the world. And the key thing is that there is no recipe, there is no one way to do it. Everyone will always backtrace what worked for them and say that is the path to success. But the beach has already, come up, washed away their path, and you have to find your own. Annoyingly, frustratingly, but that is the way that it works. It's always seeing what works for other people, how does it align with my process and the way that I work, can I apply some of those strategies? And just keep going, because it's a long journey, it's a long process, it's a long time, but we will get there, and we will get there together. So please subscribe if you want to see how this journey continues to its very end. I hope it doesn't end, but will someday. But that's the latest problem. For now, we are enjoying the day. So, if you want to see the day be enjoyed, follow along.